Today we're going to talk about public-private partnerships and how they are an effective solution to complex public policy problems. Problems we have today and that are definitely going to be with us in the future. Large problems. TEDx problems, Johns Hopkins problems. And then we're going to start by looking at these hands. These hands represent the billion people looking for water every day that's safe and adequate in supply. The 2.5 billion people looking for sanitation because they lack it. And now 900 million people who are elderly, defined as merely 60 years of age. Those 900 million people are going to grow by 56% between now and 2030 to 1.4 billion. And many of them are going to contract non-communicable diseases, if they haven't already. Diabetes, heart disease, cancers. How are we going to be prepared for them? So public-private partnerships are collaborative structures designed for a specific purpose or project where there's a sharing of risks, resources, and decisions. This is different than other structures because they involve governance. It's the sharing of decisions that matters. And when we look at these two rocks formations and we see the climbers, we think of a partnership. Think about their equipment as a resource, their specific skills to get up there, and how dependent they are on their decisions and the decisions of the other person. But when we're looking at this as a partnership, we want to think about what's my reference point to be a partner. Has it been my parents? Are they partners? Can I identify with that type of partnership? Is it where I work? Perhaps I'm in a partnership that's an institution or has become one. And public-private partnerships essentially are institutional activities where people make a tremendous individual difference. But they have to ask themselves, who are my other partners? So do we think of government, whether it be the national government, the state government, or municipal government? Our governments are partners, in particular when I have a complex problem. But we also live in communities. And these communities interact with the private sector. And as members of the community, we are asking ourselves all the time, what is the private sector doing with me that helps me with the kinds of problems I'm concerned about? And the private sector is saying, why can't we get any energy from this community or municipal government to solve some problems around here? Where is the facilitation for the partnership? And one of the reasons that facilitating partnerships is so difficult is that our skill set is often trapped by bias. We know that to partner with another party means working with someone we don't like, we don't agree with, but who we need for approvals or we need for resources. How often in the nonprofit world do we look at a donor and say, oh, you're fantastic, and we're thinking, just give me the money so I can do my job. So unless a public-private partnership has respect, trust, and credibility, it will never be sustainable. The partners are not going to be able to get together and stay together because the government doesn't trust the private sector, because of profit motives. Or maybe communities don't want government to rezone around them in the name of economic development. Whatever the issue is, PPPs require this to start. But this is a lot to ask for. So as a practical matter, I'm suggesting we look at skills, advanced skills that are necessary for public-private partnerships. One that's very relevant to the TEDx talk today is negotiation. Because we're asked to think about how to negotiate our way through different dimensions, to deal with obstacles. And in particular, if we're interested in innovation, we have obstacles, and innovation is not exactly the same as creativity. It's a process to manage, to seek opportunity, to remove barriers, often through negotiation. But we want to have our strategic thinking set up before we take these actions. What do we actually need to get it done? And who can do this with us? The who involves political management, because often we're dealing across cultures, across countries, across the culture of institutions. And political management skills are vital in public-private partnerships. And they can't be left just to the politicians. We are very focused today on how to do things financially. Will it work? Will it be economical? What's the financial structure? In fact, many of my students, that's really what they want to know. Just give me the model. But what we're going to learn in the cases I'm going to cover today is the model without the right assumptions is of no value. So we're very focused on the thinking that goes into assumptions and then how to communicate the real risks and probable outcomes, and to do it as transparently as possible. So these skills can't be allocated to 6 different people. You have to be the master of several of them, and your team has to be the master of all of them. Now, to make this work, we want to go through cases, because this is the way you teach public-private partnerships. And when we look at this picture, we know that this park is magnificent. Clearly one of the best in the world. It ought to be, because of the 58 million visitors who come to New York City every year, 44 million make their way to Central Park. And this park, as great as it looks today, took a number of decades through the Central Park Conservancy's resources, risk management, and decision-making to make this conservancy work as a PPP. It's not the only park PPP in New York, and each one, like the rock formations, is different. But it's been very effective because of the 44 million people, they're going into that park because it's free, yes, open access, yes, safe, yes. But they may not be aware that it wasn't always that way. The park was unsafe. It was very badly maintained. It was dusty and abandoned. And it took communities and the private sector to make that change. And if we look at this, we have to ask, what type of public liability can a public-private partnership convert to a public asset? So if we look at this abandoned elevated freight railroad track on the west side of Manhattan, that's the Hudson River. It's not doing anything, and it hasn't for decades. It's been abandoned because freight trains no longer go to these enormous buildings on the west side of Manhattan where goods would be dropped off, manufactured goods loaded on, because New York was a manufacturing center. It's hard to believe, but through imagination and a change of process and the use of a PPP, we have the High Line. The High Line is a $240 million, 7-acre project. It's attracted 80 million in private sector money, 7 million visitors a year, has had an outstanding effect on the economic development of the Chelsea area and the West Side. A different image with no economic development, apparently, is this road, the Indiana Toll Road. This is a 150-mile road, a public-private partnership started by the governor of Indiana in 2006. It doesn't look heavily traveled. This is not the New Jersey Turnpike. This is a major thoroughfare, though. Why it's important is that the revenue from tolls pays for the economics of the partnership, the $3.8 billion that investors put up. But not enough, because by 2014, this public-private partnership went bankrupt. The assumptions used to estimate traffic were wrong. And the governor was smart. He used the money to pay down debt, but also improve other roads. Trucks went on other roads, diverted in order to lower their fares and improve their profits. Something very fast and very modern is a $17 billion Taiwan high-speed rail, an engineering marvel built through mountains of rock, built to resist typhoons, came in on budget, on time, and operates on time, 99% of the time, except the assumptions were too optimistic. Half the riders who were expected in the first 2 years didn't show up. And the $17 billion needed to be financed by banks, and their ability to be repaid was slower and more partial than anybody wanted. But there was a negotiation here where the government accepted the demand of the banks to guarantee the loans. Good thing. How does this happen? These are smart people. It happened because of compromises. The stations were built where it was less expensive, but not as many people were there. They didn't raise the tolls on the highways to move people from their car seats to the train seats. And it failed financially, but it went on operationally because it was so well done. So if we ask ourselves, public-private partnerships, this is pretty good stuff. Look at the variety of problems, from parks to roads to transportation and certainly electric power and telecom. This is great stuff. But how many people are we impacting? Tens of millions of people? But at the beginning of the talk, I talked about billions of people. So we have to rethink the benefits of how to apply public-private partnerships, in particular to healthcare and people who have health and other needs. How is it going to work for them? So we go back to a set of hands. In rural China, and this woman is one of 250 million elderly. Now that number is on track to be 450 million just by 2030. The elderly are an asset in China, very important part of families. And they require treatment in terms of their future. How is it going to work? They need operational capacity built for them, innovation that can be applied to them, and financial resources. So when we think about assembling a public-private partnership for the elderly just in one country, and there are large elderly populations building in many developed countries, and certainly in emerging markets, we have to think of a whole new army, practically, of human resources to care for people, and to do it under government licensing and registration and regulations that make sense, and to have assisted living facilities that are appropriate and affordable, and sensitivity to the cultural implications of the elderly in this particular country, and social policies to support it. And last, we need technology, because I'm not talking about FaceTime, where the grandparent is talking to the granddaughter. We're talking about how to connect people in terms of diagnosis, to allow prevention to be more prevalent, and impacting human behavior's interaction with the elderly care complex. To do that, the thought process for public-private partnerships is going to be changing to reach the scale we need for these large problems. We need to think about a different construct. So we're going to take all the things, our 6 skills that I mentioned earlier, a multi-asset approach, such as in the Taiwan high-speed rail, and we need to look at behavioral change. Central Park works because people now respect it and take care of it. All public assets do better when people are contributing to their maintenance in some form. And when we have institutional leadership that is more steady state, where we feel that we're not just going to run from one political cycle to the next, but more along the course of the life of the asset or our needs. How to think this through? We need technology to help us think this through. Cognitive intelligence is on the horizon now, and applying it to healthcare, in particular when we're combining prevention and treatment, as opposed to treatment alone, and applying to people whose awareness levels are low, and how to obtain information faster. But we're dealing with billions of decisions about billions of people. And it's not going to take a lot of smart people to do that. It's going to be technology plus smart people plus government and the different sectors working together. So to do that, we want to understand the important lessons that we're trying to learn through this talk. One, we have 3 elements in public-private partnerships that really count. Our communities, that's where we are. Our communities where public value needs to be enhanced, where there has to be protection of public assets, and where there has to be long-term decisions that match our needs over time, particularly as we get older, or we have young people who need to be educated. We need to have a government that is our fiduciary, steady state fiduciary, and a regulator, not too hot, not too cold. Again, a predictable regulator. And very important is that government be a facilitator, because government can facilitate interaction between communities and the private sector when it wants to. The private sector, we know from the case studies, will show up for financing. If the project looks reasonable, they have the money, they want to participate. They will be efficient in these large projects. That we can be confident of. And can they be innovative? Far more innovative, I'm afraid, than most governments. But by having the governments work more closely with communities and the private sector, innovation can be achieved through public-private partnership. So this is the idea, and this is what we can all work on together in the future. Thank you.